Okay, welcome to MSUA Game Changers webcast, where we speak with satellite and mobile connectivity thought leaders about industry trends and share what you need to know about the future of mobile satellite communications. I'm your host, Roger Lanto, and I'm excited to introduce Don Buchman. Buchman, yes?
And yeah, you got it right.
Got it right the first time. Okay. Senior Vice President and General Manager of Commercial Aviation at Viasat. Viasat participates and is a market leader in multiple satellite application categories, which was reflected at the MSUA's annual awards event at Satellite 2025 in Washington, where Viasat won 2 awards, one for government mobile innovation for its hybrid SATCOM approach, and one for software-defined network innovation for MUSIC, multi-domain unmanned secure integrated communications. We're here today to talk about Viasat Amara, formally introduced just weeks ago at the Aircraft Interiors Expo in Hamburg, Germany. Viasat Amara is described as multi-orbit capable, flexible, and scalable. All of that is good news in a highly competitive sector at the core of customer engagement in the aviation sector, especially in the context of more and more airlines offering free internet access on board. Are you listening, United? Let's dive in, but to get some context, please tell me a little bit about your personal journey in the satellite and aviation sectors. How and when did you get started, Don?
Well, it feels like I've been on this journey, kind of set for this journey my entire life, at least since I was schooling, right? So I got my undergraduate degree in aerospace engineering out of the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana. And got my master's degree from USC in communication systems. So it just felt like I was destined to put communication channels onto an aircraft.
Okay, so how have the requirements in the aviation sector evolved? And
Yeah.
by the way, Don, you've been at it for quite some time.
Yeah, I've been kind of a pioneer, in some ways in this. We started with connection by Boeing, back in the late '90s, and Viasat was the modem provider for the connection by Boeing system, which is one of the first, really the first commercial application of in-flight connectivity into the commercial aviation. And we launched the business jet product shortly after that, called Yonder, and that's still ongoing. Basically the Gulfstreams and Bombardiers, and made our way into commercial aviation. Again, and that was really the hallmark of that was when we announced our Viasat One platform, which was something that really married kind of the 2 barriers to entry in this market, which was having a high quality connection. So when you get on, you can do things you want to do, and having it at a economical cost that was reasonable to access it. So those are kind of the 2 things that Viasat One ushered in from previous technologies, and that's really the kind of the launch pad that we used. And it got instantiated with JetBlue back in 2013. We launched with JetBlue with free Wi-Fi everywhere, and you can do things like streaming.
Wow, I did not know JetBlue had free Wi-Fi in 2013.
Yes, 2013, wow. December 2013, we launched.
Wow. Okay. All right. How would you characterize the pace of technological change and technology adoption? Now, my background is the automotive industry, and things take years and years and years. And so I'm trying to understand what it's like with aviation.
Yeah, it's very similar, Roger. So it's you have these fast you have a consumer application like the internet, coming into a very regulated, and for the right reasons, industry where you basically technology wants to be needs to be safe first and foremost, and getting things on do take a long time. And once you're on an aircraft, it'll be on there a long time. So unlike the kind of consumer in our living rooms or changing out TVs or access points or whatever you may have every couple of years, it's much slower, which is really the pace that we've operated at. And that's that thing. Yep, the phone is definitely the one that's almost feels outdated before you've got it, out of the box. And so that's what we have to keep up with, and there's expectations that go with that. So
what is the decision timeline and the implementation timeline and the cost recovery ROI timeline?
Yeah, so the decision timeline, I think, is getting faster now. So I think early on, we in the industry, we didn't quite know would connectivity really be something that passengers wanted, right? We always had a joke back in 15 years ago that our competition was a book and Jack Daniels. So it was like, okay, what's my what am I competing against for attention span, right? That's what you're looking for. It turned out, I would say there's been a bunch of co-innovations. So you just showed the phone. That was probably that, and coupled with streaming video, basically, consuming video went from a fixed spot in your living room to now mobile with you. And the phone kind of coupled with that, those two co-innovations created a bunch of digital natives. Even my mom, who's 92, is texting me and FaceTiming me. And these are just learned things that we now expect to do everywhere we're going. So
But
that's
now,
those
now,
are
speaking of which, maybe you can help me understand something. I don't want to get too off on a
Sure.
diversion here, but we had phones on planes for a little while, and then they went away, and maybe that's a good thing. But what happened there?
Yeah, so that was, I would say it's, there was a common combination of, there was a little bit of worry with safety. So, you have a bunch of RF radio waves where they can interfere with sensitive electronics in the aircraft, right, in the cockpit, right? So they interfere with the pilot's ability to safely command the aircraft. That was one aspect of it. And then the other aspect of it was more social. Do you really want to be sitting, do you really want to have a plane full of people yelling and then on a phone, the next one gets on the phone, then they talk louder and they talk louder. So this is using your own personal device for audio. And so I think there's some social norms that would play out, buses, you see quiet spots of buses and trains. So kind of, I think the industry has sort of gone there, but a little bit of worried of a constrained environment. Is there a social taboo, if you will, of sort of being and talking, loudly on a phone? I think those two things were sort of the things, and I think there hasn't been a large demand for it. I think text communications are pretty much the norm, whether it be social media or text-based conversations, where folks are now sort of more accustomed to that asynchronous communications versus synchronous thing that audio does.
And okay, you say the decision-making process to bring connectivity onto the airplane is going a little faster. How about implementation? We make the decision, we're doing this. How long does it take to actually get into the field?
Yeah, so that's like, so I'd say the decision process has really come down quickly. Before it was kind of felt like it was years. Now it's months. Because I think there's just a change in demand. Do I have to have Wi-Fi? Yes or no was a question. Now it's not a question. And then it was a question of what do I use it for? Do I paid or free? And is there enough demand? That's gone away. So now the implementation is really, as you've gone through the equipment suites, we get on aircraft and it's pretty quick. I mean, Delta Airlines and American Airlines, and our customers, they were able to outfit a lion's share of their fleet within 12 to 18 months.
Oh wow, okay.
And so it takes there's you basically have to get the equipment certified for a particular aircraft type. So that's sort of a tried and true process now, and then it's just installation and downtime, and that's we've gotten the downtime into the 2-day frame, which you can sort of schedule that in with other activities happening on your aircraft. And so now you can really go through a fleet really quickly.
And plane by plane, since it sounds like we're talking about a retrofit, yes?
Yeah, in that case, it's retrofit, and then when you get your new aircraft, we're line fit across the board of all the major aircraft coming off the production lines that are being ordered. And so there, you just order, you basically just check the box and say, okay, I want this equipment. Yeah, I want the Viasat, Amara's equipment suite, and then it gets delivered with the aircraft.
And what kind of a cost are we talking about up front?
In the grand scheme of things, it's not that much. Really, it's the value it's bringing. So if you look at the cost of an aircraft, it's pretty small overall. These are typically be on an aircraft for 10 plus years. So overall, when you amortize those costs, it's a very small portion of the overall acquisition cost of an airframe.
And how come some have made the decision to go free and others have yet to make that decision?
Yeah, as mentioned earlier, we launched it free. That was essentially our premise. Our premise at the beginning of this business was this was going to be a mass appeal and a mass demand, just like it did in hotels and coffee shops, other places. So that was what we built our satellites for. That's what we built our offering for. We designed in equipment that was capable to have be future-proof technology-wise. In the anticipation, we'd go from a paid environment, which is low take rate. Take rate is how many folks online, actually use the service, to paid, which is then going to enable everyone. And so I would say, we've been leading the way. I think there's been some performance, things that, we've been performing, say for 10 plus years now without, any issues on free. But I think it was a matter for the industry to kind of get there, but I think we're starting to see the groundswell.
So how many thousands of planes are there out there approximately that have no connectivity today?
Boy, I have to do the math on that. There's roughly around 27,000, 30,000 kind of in the,
with zero.
Yeah. That's of the total fleets. I would say we're probably, I have to look at the data. There's probably 30 to 40% penetrated with connectivity in some fashion. So it's probably, it's in the 40 to 60%. I haven't looked at the latest industry reports to kind of see, but it's quickly kind of getting going from unconnected to connected.
And how many thousands of planes are there out there that are enabling streaming video and phone calls?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so phone calls is all, I think almost everyone can support phone calls for, whether you like, say they call it voice over IP, VoIP over Wi-Fi. That's actually enabled. What most airlines have asked us and other providers is to block that. And that's not for technical reasons. It's just for social reasons. It's just like you do other objectionable content, you sort of block things. And so they've asked us to do that. Obviously, the tech savvy flyer may be able to work their way around it, but for the most part, people adhere to that. You don't hear a lot of things around that. I think recently, I think there's been some more publicity on that, and I think there's some. It's probably more social pushback that you want to be sitting next to someone on a speakerphone, for 12 hours.
Well, and there's also, I've heard more than one executive express concern about if you're just streaming whatever you want to stream, that could create some social issues as well.
It can, yeah. So that's, again, I mean, people could have brought magazines, that were objectionable on board, and they didn't, right? So these are social norms that, I think the flying public also rides buses and trains in coffee shops, and I think there's a social behavior that you sort of adhere to the norms. So I would say it's no different on an airplane than it is in other venues, and it's managed. And what we try to do is help with technology to block it so it doesn't happen. In a very low likelihood it does. But then there's also just the in-flight crew have to police these as well. But we're trying to help them not have to police them and just make it not happen from the start.
So what are the chances, not naming airlines, that I'm going to be on a flight, either transcontinental or flying over an ocean, that's going to have streaming video enabled over the Wi-Fi?
Well, all the Viasat equipment do. So I can tell you that. So we're up to, with our Amara based install base, I think we're at over 3,000 aircraft in flight around the world. And those will all have streaming capable, Wi-Fi. So when you get on, whether it's free or paid, you'll be able to stream. That's something that, we just think, we just think you don't want to curate the internet in those ways. And so you basically want to be able to let people do what they want to be able to do. We don't quite know what that is, but they do.
I just had an LA to Dulles flight with the announcements every 30 minutes. We know the Wi-Fi isn't working. Well, we're going to restart it and see it never worked the entire flight. So what can you say about the quality of service and the commitment at this point?
Yeah, that is, I mean, if there's anything that we do, that is the number one commitment, is, what the industry calls it service level agreements, or SLAs is the acronym. And that has a lot of things. Do I have, first, is it online, right? Is the equipment working? Is the network available? And then second, is it usable? Meaning, is there enough bandwidth? And so both of those are fail cases. And so that's everything we do in our investments, in our every day-to-day operations, to make sure every aircraft, every time it powers on for every flight, it's online and available. And then on the network side, which is really, think of that as capacity. Do I have the biggest fail case of in-flight Wi-Fi has been not that the technology doesn't work, it's that there's more demand than supply. That means more people got online than there was available bandwidth, and then you ran into congestion. And when you're in congestion, it feels like nothing works. And so those are the two things.
Now, when you talk, this is a multi-orbit solution, correct?
Yes, it's right now it's multi-orbit capable. Our system, the Viasat Amara system, is capable for LEOs when the next constellation that's there, when the antenna is compatible and the modem with, communicating with it. But right now, the service on Viasat will be a single geosynchronous on the Viasat satellite network.
So at some point in the future, LEO will be part of the story.
It is, yes, yep, and it's built in. This is technology we've been working on. As you kind of go into another question you had earlier, which is how fast is technology going? You have to be really future driven. So this equipment was designed over 10 years ago. That's flying around today, and it was designed to basically keep up with everything. So it was gigabit, it was gigabit speed to the aircraft. Even if that wasn't the norm back in 2014, it's it had to be compatible with all future satellite constellations, and Viasat hadn't even conceived yet. So our Viasat 2, Viasat 3 constellations we're still on a drawing board, and then this equipment was compatible with that, and it enabled innovations like continue to do, like, say, IPTV to the seatback. We're able to stream IPTV there. We're able to bring events on, live events. We're adding, we're keeping up with the demand growth. Our cell phones went from 3G to 4G to 5G in that time frame, and so we've had to keep up with that expectation, just like our cell phones did, without changing out the handset. And in that metaphor, we had to keep the aircraft the same. And so we've been able to innovate in technology, but we've been innovating in space. And the next innovation is being compatible with LEO. So when those networks come online, so Telesat is a partner of ours. Their next constellation is in 2027 timeframe, 2028 launch. And so we designed our equipment to be compatible with that and be able to gain access to that.
And is that a kind of a software update, or is that a physical? What do you have to do?
It's a software update, yeah. So the first, the first instance, the current antenna will be able to be in a switched mode through a software update. It could be either be on LEO or GEO, and then we've got our next generation antenna, which would allow us to simultaneous access both the GEO orbit and the LEO orbit. So then you can get the best of both worlds. You get the high density, low unit cost of the GEO. We put a lot of bandwidth over really dense, geographic demand areas, and the low latency of LEO. So for applications like shoot 'em up games and fast twitch things, that you could be able to get the low latency of that, so you don't get that lag on those.
But actually, you're really concerned about safety, right?
We are concerned about safety. Safety first and foremost for our customer base and our flying public, which is me. I fly a lot, as you can imagine.
Okay. By the way, you brought up a sore subject for me coming out of the automotive industry, the shift 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G. We've had millions of cars lose connectivity in this shift from as spectrum gets refarmed. I'm assuming the satellite industry doesn't really operate that way.
It can, and that's one of the things that we try to avoid. So we got to be really smart about, knowing our roadmaps. You got to be pretty clear. You don't have to be exact, but you have to know where you're going and how you're going to get there. And, it isn't trivial to put equipment on a plane, just like a car, changing out something on the, at the OEM. If that 5G, if that 3G radio goes obsolete, then the car doesn't get produced for 2 years, you're in trouble. So we've been really thoughtful on that to make sure we can keep up with the technology roadmaps and make that initial investment as productive as it can be over the long haul.
I don't want to blindside you with anything, but I am curious, since I brought up the S word, safety. How would you compare what's going on in the cabin versus what's going on in the cockpit from a satellite perspective?
Yeah, so there are definitely two different networks, right? So the cockpit, so we are one of the world leaders. We have an L-band system, an L-band constellation, that we are the safety leader in communications for the cockpit. So that's secure, redundant, highly resilient, highly available, and it needs to be kind of separated out from the cabin side of things. For cyber perspectives, you kind of keep not just logical walls. You basically keep pretty much separate networks there. So you basically have cockpits separated for critical safety, critical items for the pilot and crew to be able to safely man the aircraft.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but when they tell you to shut off your cell phone, that it might interfere with the operation of the airplane, the immediate thought I'm having is, you've got to be kidding me. My phone is really, seriously? Well, can you lay that to rest in some way?
Well, there's been a lot of industry, so I'm not the expert, but there's a lot of there's a lot of research out there of just basically interference with cockpit. So whether it be it's not just one device. It's if you have 300 devices on a plane, is there enough radio frequency noise that may get coupled into a critical item that would cause either noise or intermittency on any cockpit safety critical cockpit item? That's the fear, and that's what they've done a lot of testing to make sure that they've covered all those cases off.
Okay, so Don Buchman's phone is on airplane mode on every flight.
Is on airplane mode as soon as I get on board.
Okay. And when you talk about scalability and flexibility on the Viasat Amara platform, What exactly are you referring to?
Yeah, so it's a little bit what we just discussed, kind of on this forward looking, right? So the scalability means, if I built a system with kind of a fixed bandwidth that's associated with it, it may not be able to scale as demand peaks. I don't want to run out. I don't want to hit a artificial ceiling. So we've built in really high, not just for you have different bottlenecks. You have the Wi-Fi networks, so your phone talks about, over Wi-Fi to inside the plane. Then the plane, that's one bottleneck. So we've gotten the latest and greatest of the Wi-Fi networks, the full 5 and 6 mesh. Then you've got the plane talking to the satellite. That's another source of a bottleneck, because if there's more demand coming on or off the plane, then that individual pipe can go. So we've made that a gigabit link. And then there's the satellite itself, the satellites and satellite networks. If there's a lot of planes over, say, the North Atlantic flying between New York and London, or over a busy air corridor, say down the U.S. Eastern corridor, where you get heavy traffic, or on the ground, right, as a rainstorm or a ground hold in Dallas or Atlanta, you're going to have a lot of aircraft in a very small area, and they're going to be wanting to have access. And so you basically want to know you have enough bandwidth in that geographic location to serve really dense demand. So those are your constraints, and that's when we say scalable. We mean that no matter what the demand is, whether it be from a device, if the next cool application requires more bandwidth, or if it's from an airplane, more people want to get online, or if it's from a dense region, that more aircraft and more people in that region want to get online, we don't run into constraints. So that's when we talk about scale, and that's for us, where we do not want to run out. If there's more demand than supply, that's not good. So we're always going to be keeping innovating. And as you know from our cell phones and our homes, the demand at home and our devices every year just keeps increasing. So we need to keep increasing with that.
And of course, our final question here: what's next for Viasat in the aviation space, and where can people learn more about your latest solutions?
Yeah. So, first you go to viasat.com. Of course, you can learn about us. We have an aviation page there. So our next launch is, so we've got Viasat 3, so it's our global constellation coming up. So we've got the launches later this year, which is really exciting. So that's going to bring the experience we've been bringing in areas around the world. Now it's our next generation to the rest of the world, bringing a terabit of capacity on each satellite, which is, in context, Viasat 1, which was launched in 2011, had about 140 gigabits. So, it's almost a 10x increase, right? And so that's kind of but that's demand. That's where it's going. And then, I think we talked about multi-orbit. That's really the next, frontier of basically having, really intelligent routing, such that you can use the best of both worlds. You can drive down unit cost, right? Because that's the name of the game, and you're in a transmission business. It's what's your cost of transmission. So we need to keep driving that down, because we know demand keeps increasing. And so you basically have to balance those two out and have a customer experience and quality of experience. So the latest applications that neither you or I have even thought of yet, who knew TikTok would be coming? That's those basically make sure that we have a system that's capable of delivering on those. And so that's what we continue to do, continue to innovate behind the scenes to drive it, so we make it look easy. And the passenger gets online, they don't actually even know they're on an airplane. They're using Wi-Fi airplane, they're just using Wi-Fi. There shouldn't be an expectation difference.
Thank you for those insights, Don. And there's just a little bit of kernel of bad news for me on this call. I'm flying on the wrong airline. But let me take us out here. I want to thank the Mobile Satellite Users Association for hosting these sessions. You can learn more about the MSUA at msua.org. You can learn how to get our weekly newsletter that gives you updates on everything that's happening in the industry and shares information about upcoming events. And you can also find out how to become a member. We look forward to seeing you next time on MSUA's Game Changer webcast. Don, thanks again.
Oh, thank you guys. Thank you guys for hosting me.
All right.